The heavy oak doors of Riverside County Superior Court groaned as they swung open at exactly 9 a.m. on that fateful Tuesday morning in September 2019. Judge Maria Elena Rodriguez stepped through the judicial chamber's entrance, her black robes billowing behind her like wings of justice. At 53, she had presided over this courtroom for 15 years, earning a reputation as one of California's most fair but unflinching judges. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and her dark eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen every possible human drama unfold within these walls. The courtroom buzzed with electric tension as she approached the bench. This wasn't just another drug case. This was the trial that had captured the attention of the entire Inland Empire. Local news vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers seeking sunlight. The gallery was packed beyond capacity, with spectators squeezed shoulder to shoulder on the wooden benches that had witnessed decades of justice being served. At the defendant's table sat Marcus Jerome Thompson, 24 years old, his hands folded so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Just 3 months earlier, he had been celebrating his acceptance into UCLA's medical school program, the culmination of years of academic excellence and volunteer work at free clinics throughout Los Angeles. His pre-med grades were spotless, a 3.9 GPA that represented countless nights of studying while working 2 jobs to support himself through college. His dream of becoming a pediatric surgeon, inspired by watching doctors save his younger sisters. Life after a car accident now hung in the balance like a thread over an abyss. The charges against Marcus were devastating in their scope and severity. The prosecution alleged possession with intent to distribute 2.5 ounces of high-grade cocaine, enough to trigger mandatory minimum sentencing that would send him to state prison for at least 5 years. In California's 3 strikes system, this felony conviction would follow him forever, making it impossible to obtain a medical license or pursue any career requiring professional certification. His dreams wouldn't just be delayed, they would be completely obliterated. His mother, Carmen Thompson, occupied the front row directly behind the defense table. She clutched a worn leather purse in one hand and a crumpled acceptance letter from UCLA Medical School in the other. Tears had been flowing down her cheeks since she entered the courtroom, leaving mascara tracks that she hadn't bothered to wipe away. Carmen had worked 3 jobs throughout Marcus's childhood, cleaning office buildings at night, serving lunch at an elementary school cafeteria, and taking in ironing on weekends, all to ensure her son could focus on his studies. She had sacrificed everything for his education, often going without meals, so he could afford textbooks and lab fees. The prosecution's case seemed airtight, built around the testimony of Officer Michael Bradley and his legendary K-9 partner. Rex Bradley, a 10-year veteran of the Riverside Police Department, had built his entire career on drug interdiction. His arrest record was spotless, with over 300 drug-related busts and a conviction rate that made him the poster child for effective policing. Prosecutors loved working with him because his cases never fell apart in court. His evidence was always pristine, his reports meticulously detailed, and his testimony unshakable. But it was Rex who truly made Bradley untouchable. The 5-year-old German Shepherd had become something of a celebrity in law enforcement circles. Featured on the cover of Police K-9 magazine twice, Rex had been the subject of a Discovery Channel documentary about elite drug detection dogs. His success rate was unprecedented in over 200 searches. He had never produced a false positive. When Rex alerted to the presence of drugs, investigators found them every single time. Other police departments sent their handlers to train with Bradley and Rex, hoping to replicate their extraordinary partnership. The media attention surrounding this case had reached fever pitch because of Rex's involvement. Channel 7 News had been running a series called Wonder Dog vs. Pre-Med Student for the past 2 weeks. with legal experts debating whether any defense attorney could successfully challenge Rex's track record. The consensus was clear. If Rex had alerted to drugs in Marcus Thompson's vehicle, then Marcus Thompson was guilty, regardless of his protests of innocence. Sarah Mitchell, Marcus's court-appointed public defender, sat beside her client reviewing her notes one final time. At 38, she had been practicing criminal defense for 12 years, taking on cases that more established attorneys wouldn't touch. Her caseload was crushing. She was currently representing 47 clients in various stages of the legal process, but something about Marcus's case had compelled her to dig deeper than usual. His story didn't add up in ways that bothered her professionally and personally. Marcus maintained that he had been driving his cousin's Honda Civic to return it after borrowing it for a job interview. He claimed he had no knowledge of any drugs in the vehicle and had never used illegal substances in his life, a claim supported by years of clean drug tests required for his volunteer work at local hospitals. His fingerprints weren't found on the bags of cocaine, and his phone records showed no contact with known drug dealers. Yet Rex had allegedly alerted to the trunk with such enthusiasm that Bradley had described it as the most aggressive drug alert I've witnessed in my career. As Judge Rodriguez settled into her chair and surveyed the packed courtroom, she felt the weight of the moment. In 15 years on the bench, she had learned to read the subtle currents of tension that flowed through her courtroom like invisible rivers. Today, those currents felt different, charged with an electricity that made the hair on her arms stand up. Something about this case was going to be extraordinary. She had no idea just how extraordinary it would become. Rex had been the golden child of the Riverside Police Department's K-9 unit since his arrival as an 8-week-old puppy 5 years earlier. Born in Germany from a prestigious bloodline of working dogs, he had cost the department $15,000, a hefty investment that had paid dividends beyond anyone's wildest expectations. His training records read like a fairy tale of canine excellence. Graduated top of his class at the California Canine Academy, certified in narcotics detection, explosive detection, and suspect apprehension. His bite strength had been measured at 238 pounds per square inch, and his nose contained 300 million scent receptors, compared to a human's mere 6 million. The German Shepherd's reputation had spread far beyond Riverside County. Police departments from as far away as New York and Texas had sent their handlers to observe Rex in action. The Drug Enforcement Administration had featured him in their annual report as an example of exceptional K-9 performance in the field. Children's books had been written about his heroic drug busts, and his photograph hung in the lobby of police headquarters alongside commendations from 3 different governors. But the Rex that lay motionless on the cold courtroom floor bore no resemblance to the legendary superdog of law enforcement lore. Judge Rodriguez had been observing Rex since the moment she entered the courtroom, and what she saw disturbed her in ways she couldn't immediately articulate. Having grown up on a ranch in Bakersfield, she had been around working dogs her entire life. Her family had raised German Shepherds for 3 generations, and she could read canine behavior like a children's book. The animal before her was displaying none of the characteristics she associated with healthy, alert police dogs. Rex lay on his right side near the witness stand, his massive frame completely still, except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. His breathing appeared labored and irregular, as if each breath required tremendous effort. His tongue lolled from his mouth, pink and dry, touching the courtroom's polished marble floor. Most troubling of all were his eyes, those dark, intelligent eyes that had been featured on magazine covers, now stared blankly ahead with no recognition, no awareness of his surroundings. During her 15 years on the bench, Judge Rodriguez had presided over dozens of cases involving police dogs. She had watched K-9 officers demonstrate their partners' abilities, observed dogs alerting to evidence presentations, and seen the intense bond between handlers and their four-legged partners. Police dogs were typically hypervigilant in courtroom settings, their ears erect and rotating to catch every sound, their eyes tracking movement with laser focus. They remained connected to their handlers through subtle communication, a gesture, a word, a slight shift in posture that the dog would immediately acknowledge. Rex showed none of these behaviors. When Officer Bradley had entered the courtroom 30 minutes earlier, Rex hadn't acknowledged his presence. Most police dogs would have shown some reaction to their handler's arrival, a tail wag, perked ears, or at minimum, eye contact. Rex had been carried into the courtroom on a specialized stretcher and positioned on the floor where he now lay completely motionless. Judge Rodriguez had initially assumed this was some sort of tactical positioning, perhaps to keep the dog calm. During testimony, now she realized something was terribly, horribly wrong. The first major red flag had occurred during the prosecution's opening statement. District Attorney Patricia Hawkins had gestured toward Rex while describing his unparalleled track record of drug detection, calling him the finest narcotics detection dog in California history. In every other K-9 case Judge Rodriguez had witnessed, dogs would perk up when they heard their names or became the center of attention. They would look toward the speaker, maybe wag their tails, or show some sign of recognition. Rex hadn't moved a muscle. The second alarming sign came when Officer Bradley approached the witness stand to begin his testimony. Police dogs were trained to maintain visual contact with their handlers during court proceedings, following their every movement like shadows. When Bradley stood up, Rex should have at least lifted his head to track his partner's location. Instead, the German Shepherd continued staring at the wall with vacant, unfocused eyes that seemed to look through rather than at anything in particular. But the most chilling moment came when Bradley called Rex's name during his testimony. Rex, immediately alerted to the presence of narcotics, Bradley had said, gesturing toward his partner. Any trained dog would have responded to hearing his name, spoken by his handler in a formal setting. The response might be subtle ears forward, a slight turn of the head, or a shift in posture, but there would be some acknowledgement. Rex didn't even blink. Judge Rodriguez found herself studying the dog more intently, her legal training warring with her instinctive concern for the animal's welfare. His coat, usually glossy and perfectly groomed according to the photographs in police publications, looked dull and patchy. She could see his ribs more prominently and seemed healthy for a working dog. Most disturbing was the complete absence of muscle tension in his body. He looked less like a resting dog and more like an animal under heavy sedation. Public Defender Sarah Mitchell had also noticed Rex's strange behavior, though her observations came from a different perspective. She had handled 17 K-9 cases in her career, and in every single instance, the police dogs had been alert, responsive, and clearly capable of performing the duties described in testimony. She had learned to watch the dogs during proceedings, because their behavior often provided insight into their handler's credibility. Rex's complete disengagement was unlike anything she had ever witnessed in a courtroom setting. During a brief sidebar conference, Sarah leaned toward Judge Rodriguez and whispered, "Your Honor, something is very wrong with that dog. He hasn't responded to a single stimulus since entering this courtroom. I'm beginning to question whether he's even capable of the drug detection activities described in Officer Bradley's testimony." Judge Rodriguez nodded grimly, her own concerns crystallizing into a growing suspicion that this case was about to take a very dark turn. The legendary Rex, hero of hundreds of drug busts and star of law enforcement publications, appeared to be barely clinging to life. Officer Michael Bradley straightened his uniform tie as he approached the witness stand, his polished boots clicking against the marble floor with military precision. At 38 years old, he cut an impressive figure 6 feet 2 inches of lean muscle, with close-cropped brown hair and steel-gray eyes that had intimidated countless suspects over his 10-year career. His chest displayed an array of commendations: Medal of Valor, Distinguished Service Award, and the coveted Canine Handler of the Year recognition he had won 3 consecutive times. As he raised his right hand to be sworn in, Bradley's voice carried the confident authority of someone who had testified in over 150 criminal cases without ever having his credibility successfully challenged. He had earned a reputation as the prosecutor's dream witness, articulate, unflappable, and possessing an encyclopedic knowledge of police procedure that made cross-examination attempts futile. Officer Bradley, began Assistant District Attorney Patricia Hawkins, please describe the events of August 15, 2019, beginning with your patrol assignment that evening. Bradley settled into the witness chair with practiced ease, his testimony flowing like a well-rehearsed performance. I was conducting routine traffic enforcement along Highway 91 near the University Avenue exit at approximately 10:30 p.m. My partner Rex and I were positioned in our marked patrol vehicle when I observed a blue Honda Civic traveling eastbound at an estimated speed of 78 miles per hour in a 65-mile-per-hour zone. He gestured toward his motionless partner with theatrical precision. Rex was secured in his compartment in the rear of my patrol vehicle, alert and ready for deployment as always. When I initiated the traffic stop, the defendant's vehicle took an unusually long time to pull over approximately 1/4 mile, which immediately raised my suspicions about possible criminal activity. The courtroom hung on his every word as Bradley painted a picture of textbook police work. His arrest report, admitted into evidence as Exhibit A, was a masterpiece of detailed documentation. Every timestamp was precise, every observation meticulously recorded, every procedural step executed flawlessly, according to department policy. Upon approaching the vehicle, I observed the defendant, Marcus Thompson, displaying several indicators of nervous behavior. Bradley continued, his voice growing more confident as he warmed to his narrative. His hands were shaking, he was sweating profusely despite the cool evening temperature, and he kept glancing toward the rear of the vehicle. When I asked for his driver's license and registration, he fumbled through multiple items in his wallet before producing the requested documents. Bradley's testimony was a clinic in police procedure. He described running Thompson's license through the computer system, checking for outstanding warrants, and observing the defendant's increasingly agitated behavior during the 10-minute records check. Everything he recounted aligned perfectly with established protocols for traffic stops, creating an airtight foundation for what came next. Based on Mr. Thompson's suspicious behavior and my training in detecting criminal activity, I decided to request permission to search the vehicle. Bradley testified. When I asked the defendant if he had any weapons, drugs, or contraband in the car, he became visibly more nervous and denied having anything illegal. His response patterns were consistent with deceptive behavior I've observed in my experience. Here, Bradley's testimony took on an almost mystical quality as he described Rex's involvement. I retrieved Rex from the patrol vehicle and began conducting an exterior sweep of the Honda Civic. Rex is trained to detect the odor of marijuana, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and several other controlled substances. His training records show a 99.7% accuracy rate in detecting narcotics in controlled testing environments. The prosecution had entered Rex's training certificates into evidence impressive documents from the California Canine Academy showing hundreds of hours of specialized instruction. The certifications bore official seals and signatures from respected canine trainers, creating an unassailable paper trail of expertise. As we approached the rear of the vehicle, Rex's behavior changed dramatically. Bradley continued, his voice taking on the reverent tone reserved for describing his partner's legendary abilities. He began showing signs of intense interest in the trunk area. His ears came forward, his tail went rigid, and he started pulling toward the rear of the car with unusual force. These are classic indicators of a positive narcotics alert. Bradley described Rex's aggressive scratching at the trunk lid, his excited panting and whining, and his laser focus on the area where drugs would later be discovered. The testimony painted a picture of a highly trained detection dog exhibiting unmistakable signs of narcotics detection behavior that had led to successful prosecutions in dozens of previous cases. Rex's alert was so strong that I immediately recognized we had located a significant quantity of illegal substances, Bradley testified. In my 10 years of working with K9 partners, I had never seen such an intense and sustained alert. Rex was practically climbing on top of the trunk, pawing at the lid with both front feet and barking continuously. The search that followed seemed almost anticlimactic after Rex's dramatic alert. Bradley described obtaining keys from Thompson, opening the trunk, and discovering 2 plastic bags containing white powder hidden beneath the spare tire. Field testing confirmed the substance was cocaine with an estimated street value of $8,000. But, as defense attorney Sarah Mitchell rose for cross-examination, the perfectly constructed narrative began to develop hairline cracks that would eventually shatter the entire case. Officer Bradley, you mentioned that Rex was alert and ready for deployment when you began the traffic stop. Can you describe his specific behavior during the drive to your patrol location that evening? I'm sorry, could you clarify the question? Was Rex exhibiting normal behavior in the hours leading up to this arrest? Did he eat his regular meal? Did he respond to commands appropriately? Did he seem physically well? For the first time since taking the stand, Bradley hesitated. His confident demeanor flickered momentarily as he glanced toward his motionless partner on the courtroom floor. Rex was performing within normal parameters for his training and experience level. Mitchell pressed forward, sensing weakness. Officer Bradley, when was the last time Rex received veterinary care prior to August 15th? The question hung in the air like a sword over Bradley's head, and for the first time in his testimony, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. The perfect case was about to fall apart. The lunch recess couldn't come fast enough for Judge Rodriguez. As the courtroom emptied and the gallery cleared of spectators, she remained seated at her bench, staring down at Rex's motionless form. The German shepherd hadn't moved in over 2 hours, his labored breathing the only sign of life. Something deep in her gut, an instinct, honed by 15 years of separating truth from lies, screamed that this case was built on a foundation of deception so cruel it made her physically ill. Judge Rodriguez retreated to her chambers, closing the heavy oak door behind her with a decisive click. The walls of her office were lined with law books, family photographs, and commendations from various legal organizations, but her attention was focused entirely on the phone sitting on her mahogany desk. She needed answers, and she knew exactly who to call. Dr. Isabella Rodriguez-Chan had been practicing veterinary medicine for 22 years, specializing in large breed dogs and working animals. More importantly, she was Judge Rodriguez's younger sister and the one person who could decode the mystery of Rex's disturbing condition. The two sisters had maintained their close bond despite their different career paths, often consulting each other when their professional worlds intersected. "Bella, I need your help," Judge Rodriguez said without preamble when her sister answered. On the second ring, "I have a police dog in my courtroom that's exhibiting behavior I've never seen before. He's completely unresponsive, breathing irregularly, and showing no awareness of his surroundings. His handler claims he performed drug detection work just 3 weeks ago, but I'm looking at an animal that appears to be barely conscious." Dr. Rodriguez-Chan's voice immediately shifted to professional concern. "Maria, that doesn't sound like any working dog I've ever encountered. Police K9 South are bred and trained for hypervigilance. What you're describing sounds more like an animal, under heavy sedation or suffering from severe neurological compromise. Has anyone mentioned recent medical treatment? That's what I'm trying to find out. Can you help me access veterinary records for a dog named Rex, handled by Officer Michael Bradley of the Riverside Police Department? I have judicial authority to compel production of medical records if necessary. There was a pause as Dr. Rodriguez-Chun considered the implications. Maria, if you suspect animal abuse or neglect in connection with a criminal case, I can make some calls. The veterinary community in Riverside County is fairly tight-knit. Give me 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. As Judge Rodriguez paced her chambers, her mind racing through the legal and ethical implications of what she suspected. If Officer Bradley had used a sick or dying dog to fabricate evidence, it would represent one of the most heinous betrayals of justice she had ever encountered. The thought that Rex might have been suffering while being forced to participate in fraudulent arrests made her stomach churn with rage. Her phone rang exactly 19 minutes later. "Maria, sit down." Dr. Rodriguez-Chun's voice was grave. "I spoke with Dr. Sarah Winters at Riverside Animal Medical Center. Rex has been a patient there for the past 8 months, and the records are devastating." Judge Rodriguez felt her heart begin to race as her sister continued. Rex was diagnosed with glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor, in January of this year. Dr. Winters performed emergency surgery on August 8th, just 1 week before your defendant's arrest date. The tumor had grown to the size of a golf ball and was pressing against his brainstem, causing seizures, disorientation, and severe cognitive impairment. The words hit Judge Rodriguez like physical blows. What kind of medications would he be on? The post-surgical protocol included morphine for pain management, phenobarbital for seizure control, and dexamethasone to reduce brain swelling. Maria, any one of these medications would render a detection dog completely useless for police work. In combination, they would leave the animal barely functional. Dr. Winters told me she specifically advised Officer Bradley that Rex should be retired immediately and kept in a quiet, comfortable environment for his remaining time. Judge Rodriguez closed her eyes, the full horror of the situation washing over her. How long did Rex have to live? Dr. Winters gave him 2 to 4 weeks maximum. That was 4 weeks ago. The implications were staggering. Not only had Officer Bradley used a dying, heavily medicated dog to fabricate evidence, but he had forced Rex to endure the stress and trauma of police work while the animal was suffering from terminal cancer and barely able to function. Bella, I need you to document everything: the diagnosis, the surgery dates, the medications, the prognosis, everything. I'm going to need expert testimony about how these conditions would affect a dog's ability to perform scent detection work. Maria, there's more. Dr. Winters said Officer Bradley specifically asked her not to discuss Rex's condition with anyone. He claimed it was for operational security reasons, but she found his behavior suspicious. He also missed 2 follow-up appointments and hasn't returned calls about Rex's deteriorating condition. Judge Rodriguez felt her judicial composure cracking as anger flooded through her system. He knew Rex was dying, and he used him anyway. According to the medical records, it would have been impossible for Rex to perform any kind of scent detection work after the surgery. The combination of brain damage, medication, and post-surgical trauma would have left him completely incapacitated. Dr. Winters said she's never seen a working dog forced to continue duty in such a compromised state. As Judge Rodriguez hung up the phone, she realized she was trembling with a combination of fury and determination. The evidence was clear. Officer Bradley had committed perjury, evidence tampering, and animal cruelty, all while destroying an innocent young man's future. Rex, the legendary superdog, had been nothing more than a dying prop in an elaborate deception. But the most heartbreaking aspect was that Rex was still suffering, forced to lie on a cold courtroom floor while his handler perpetuated lies about his heroic capabilities. The dog who had genuinely served his community for years was spending his final days as an unwilling participant in the very crimes he had been trained to prevent. Judge Rodriguez returned to the courtroom with fire in her eyes and justice in her heart. The afternoon session was about to become a reckoning that would expose the cruelest deception in the history of American law enforcement. The afternoon session began with an electricity in the air that every person in the packed courtroom could feel but couldn't quite identify. Judge Rodriguez returned from her chambers at exactly 1:30 p.m., her black robes flowing behind her like the wings of an avenging angel. Her usual composed demeanor had been replaced by something far more intense, a barely contained fury that made the court reporter's fingers hover uncertainly over her stenography machine. As she settled into her chair, Judge Rodriguez's dark eyes swept across the courtroom with laser precision. They lingered on Marcus Thompson, sitting rigidly at the defense table, with his future hanging in the balance. They passed over his mother Carmen, whose tear-stained face reflected hours of agonized waiting. They acknowledged the packed gallery of reporters and spectators who sensed they were witnessing something extraordinary. But her gaze ultimately came to rest on the motionless form of Rex, lying exactly where he had been positioned 4 hours earlier, his shallow breathing the only evidence that life still flickered within his deteriorating body. Officer Bradley had returned from lunch with renewed confidence, apparently convinced that his morning testimony had sealed Marcus Thompson's fate. He sat in the witness chair, adjusting his tie and straightening his uniform with the self-assured movements of someone who had never lost a court case. His chest displayed his array of commendations like armor, and his steel-gray eyes held the certainty of a man who believed himself untouchable. He had no idea that his entire world was about to collapse in the most public and humiliating way possible. "Officer Bradley," Judge Rodriguez began, her voice carrying an edge that made every person in the courtroom lean forward in their seats. "Before we continue with your testimony, I have some questions about your partner Rex." Bradley's confident smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Of course, Your Honor. Rex is the finest narcotics detection dog in California, and I'm happy to discuss his capabilities. I'm less interested in his capabilities and more concerned about his current condition." Judge Rodriguez's words fell into the courtroom like stones into still water, creating ripples of tension that spread to every corner of the gallery. In my 15 years on this bench, I have presided over dozens of cases involving police dogs. I have never, and I want to emphasize the word never, seen a working canine display the behavior your partner is exhibiting today. The courtroom had fallen into absolute silence. Court reporters stopped typing. Spectators held their breath. Even the bailiffs stood perfectly still, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented in the annals of American jurisprudence. Officer Bradley's face had begun to pale, but he struggled to maintain his authoritative facade. "Your Honor, Rex is simply resting. Police dogs are trained to remain calm in courtroom environments to avoid disrupting proceedings." Judge Rodriguez's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Officer Bradley, that dog hasn't moved a muscle in over 4 hours. He hasn't acknowledged your voice. He hasn't responded to his name, and his breathing is so labored that I'm genuinely concerned he might be dying. Right here in my courtroom." The word "dying" hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Reporters began frantically scribbling notes. Marcus Thompson's mother gasped audibly. Defense attorney Sarah Mitchell felt her heart begin to race as she realized the judge was leading toward something explosive. "Your Honor, I assure you that Rex is perfectly fine," Bradley said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Sweat had begun to bead on his forehead, despite the courtroom's air conditioning. Judge Rodriguez stood slowly, her movement deliberate and commanding. Every eye in the courtroom followed her as she stepped down from the bench and walked toward Rex's motionless form. The click of her heels against the marble floor was the only sound in the deathly quiet courtroom. She knelt beside the dying German shepherd, her black robes pooling around her like spilled ink. With infinite gentleness, she placed her hand near Rex's muzzle, feeling the irregular, labored breathing that spoke of an animal in the final stages of terminal illness. His eyes, once bright and alert, stared sightlessly ahead with the glassy look of heavy sedation. Standing slowly, Judge Rodriguez turned to face Officer Bradley with the full weight of judicial authority behind her. The transformation was remarkable. She had gone from concerned judge to avenging prosecutor in the span of 30 seconds. "Officer Bradley," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I spent my lunch recess making phone calls. I spoke with veterinarians. I reviewed medical records. I discovered some very interesting information about your partner's recent medical history." Bradley's face had gone from pale to ashen gray. His hands gripped the witness chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. For the first time in his 10-year career, he looked genuinely terrified. "You see, I learned that Rex underwent emergency brain surgery exactly 1 week before Marcus Thompson's arrest. I learned that he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. I learned that he was prescribed medications that would render any scent detection work completely impossible. I learned that your veterinarian specifically told you that Rex should be retired immediately and kept comfortable for his remaining days." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs as the implications of the judge's words sank in. This wasn't just about a drug case anymore. This was about something far more sinister. Judge Rodriguez raised her hand, and silence fell like a curtain. She pointed directly at Rex's motionless form, her finger steady as an arrow aimed at the truth. "So here is my question, Officer Bradley, and I want you to answer it under oath, in front of these cameras, in front of this packed courtroom, and in front of God himself. Is that dying dog on my courtroom floor the same Rex who allegedly alerted to drugs in Marcus Thompson's vehicle 3 weeks ago? Or did you drag a terminally ill, heavily sedated animal into my courtroom today to perpetuate the most cruel and heartless deception I have ever witnessed in 15 years of dispensing justice?" The question hung in the air like a sword of Damocles, and in that moment, every person in the courtroom knew that they were witnessing the end of Officer Michael Bradley's career and the beginning of one of the most shocking police corruption scandals in American history. Time had stopped, and truth was about to set everyone free. The silence that followed Judge Rodriguez's devastating question stretched for what felt like an eternity. Officer Michael Bradley sat frozen in the witness chair, his steel-gray eyes darting between the judge's unwavering gaze and Rex's motionless form on the courtroom floor. The confident, unshakable police officer who had entered the courtroom that morning was gone, replaced by a cornered man whose carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. Sweat now poured down Bradley's face despite the courtroom's cool temperature. His uniform, perfectly pressed that morning, had become wrinkled and damp. His breathing had become shallow and rapid, matching the labored respirations of his dying partner. For 10 years, he had been the master of every courtroom he entered, his testimony unassailable, his credibility beyond reproach. Now faced with irrefutable medical evidence and a judge who had seen through his elaborate deception, he found himself completely defenseless. The packed gallery watched in stunned silence as Bradley's hands began to shake visibly. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words emerged. The man who had testified against hundreds of defendants with unwavering confidence couldn't form a single coherent sentence when confronted with his own crimes. District Attorney Patricia Hawkins sat at the prosecution table, her face reflecting the dawning horror of what was unfolding. She had built her case entirely on Bradley's reputation and Rex's legendary track record. The possibility that both were fraudulent had never entered her mind. As the implications sank in, she realized that this wasn't just one case falling apart. This was potentially dozens of wrongful convictions based on the testimony of a corrupt officer and his dying dog. "Officer Bradley," Judge Rodriguez pressed, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "You are under oath. The medical records are clear. Rex underwent emergency surgery for a brain tumor on August 8th. He was prescribed morphine, phenobarbital, and dexamethasone medications that would render any drug detection work impossible. Your own veterinarian told you he should be retired immediately. Yet 7 days later, you claim he performed the most aggressive drug alert of your career. Explain that to this court." Bradley's face had gone from ashen to a sickly green color. His eyes filled with tears as the weight of his deception finally became too heavy to bear. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, forcing everyone in the courtroom to strain forward to hear his words. "He was—" Bradley's voice cracked, and he swallowed hard before continuing. "Rex has been my partner for 5 years. We've made over 200 arrests together. When Dr. Winters told me about the tumor, told me he only had weeks to live, I couldn't accept it. I couldn't accept that our partnership was over." The confession began as a trickle, but quickly became a flood as 10 years of lies and pressure burst through the dam of Bradley's carefully maintained facade. The first few days after the surgery, I thought maybe he would recover enough to work again. But he never responded to commands. He couldn't even stand without help. Dr. Winters kept calling, telling me to bring him in, telling me he was suffering, but I couldn't let go. Marcus Thompson stared at Bradley in disbelief, realizing that his entire future had been destroyed by a police officer who couldn't accept his dog's terminal diagnosis. Carmen Thompson sobbed quietly, her hands covering her face as she listened to the confession that would vindicate her son. "The night of August 15th, I was desperate," Bradley continued, his voice growing stronger as the truth poured out of him. "My arrest numbers were down. Captain Morrison had been asking questions about Rex's recent inactivity. I knew if I admitted Rex was finished, they'd transfer me to patrol duty. I'd lose everything I'd worked for." Judge Rodriguez listened with a mixture of horror and fascination as Bradley detailed the elaborate deception he had constructed around his dying partner. "Rex couldn't even walk that night. I had to carry him to the patrol car and position him in his compartment. When I stopped Thompson's vehicle, Rex was barely conscious from the pain medication. I knew he couldn't perform any kind of search, but I was committed to the lie by then." The courtroom gasped as Bradley described how he had manipulated the traffic stop to create reasonable suspicion for a search. Thompson seemed nervous, which was perfect for my report. I needed a reason to search the vehicle without relying on Rex's alert, so I claimed suspicious behavior and asked for consent. "And the drugs?" Judge Rodriguez asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Bradley's confession took an even darker turn as he described planting the cocaine in Thompson's trunk. "I took the drugs from evidence lockup 3 days earlier. It was supposed to be destroyed anyway, a case from last year where the defendant died before trial. I figured no one would miss it." The revelation that Bradley had stolen evidence to frame an innocent college student sent shockwaves through the courtroom. This wasn't just about using a sick dog. This was about a systematic corruption that had infected the entire justice system. I positioned Rex near the trunk and claimed he had alerted. The poor guy could barely lift his head, but I wrote in my report that he was scratching and barking. I described the most aggressive alert I could imagine to make sure the search would be justified and the case would stick. Defense attorney Sarah Mitchell felt sick to her stomach as she realized how close Marcus Thompson had come to spending 5 years in prison for crimes he never committed. If not for Judge Rodriguez's expertise with dogs and her willingness to investigate, an innocent young man would have been destroyed by Bradley's desperate attempt to hide his partner's terminal illness. Rex should have been home, comfortable, surrounded by people who loved him, Bradley sobbed, finally looking down at his dying partner. Instead, I dragged him into this nightmare because I was too selfish and too scared to let him go. As Bradley's confession concluded, the courtroom sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of the betrayal they had witnessed. A decorated police officer had committed perjury, evidence tampering, and animal cruelty, all while destroying an innocent man's future to protect his own career. The legendary partnership between Officer Bradley and Rex had ended not in glory, but in the cruelest deception imaginable, one that would forever change how the justice system viewed police testimony and the sacred bond between handlers and their canine partners. The moment Officer Bradley's confession ended, the courtroom exploded into chaos, unlike anything in Riverside County's judicial history. Judge Rodriguez's gavel cracked against the bench like thunderclaps as she struggled to maintain order, while reporters shouted questions, spectators gasped in horror, and Marcus Thompson collapsed into his mother's arms, overwhelmed by the vindication he had never dared to hope for. Bailiff Martinez, place Officer Bradley under arrest immediately, Judge Rodriguez commanded, her voice cutting through the pandemonium with judicial authority that brooked no argument. Charges of perjury, evidence tampering, theft of evidence, and animal cruelty. Read him his rights. As the handcuffs clicked around Bradley's wrists, the disgraced officer's legs buckled beneath him. The man who had walked into the courtroom that morning as a decorated hero was now being led away as one of the most despicable criminals in the building's 150-year history. His head hung in shame as photographers captured every moment of his spectacular fall from grace. But Judge Rodriguez's attention had already shifted to the most urgent crisis at hand. Rex lay on the courtroom floor, his breathing becoming increasingly labored and irregular. Each shallow breath seemed to require tremendous effort from the dying German shepherd, and Judge Rodriguez could see that time was running out for the animal who had become an unwitting victim in Bradley's web of lies. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, she called out, addressing the defense attorney, contact Riverside Emergency Veterinary Hospital immediately. Tell them we have a critically ill police dog who needs emergency transport and end-of-life care. Tell them Judge Rodriguez is personally authorizing all expenses. As paramedics and veterinary technicians were summoned, Judge Rodriguez made a decision that would echo through legal history. This court hereby orders the immediate review of every single case involving Officer Bradley and Rex from the past 12 months. District Attorney Hawkins, your office will provide a complete list of all convictions based on this K-9 team's testimony by tomorrow morning. District Attorney Patricia Hawkins sat stunned at the prosecution table, her face reflecting the magnitude of the disaster unfolding before her. Her office had built dozens of cases on Bradley's testimony and Rex's legendary reputation. The implications were staggering. Potentially hundreds of people had been wrongfully convicted based on the lies of a corrupt officer and his dying dog. Your Honor, Hawkins managed to say, her voice barely audible, or looking at potentially 47 cases from the past year alone. If all of those convictions are based on fabricated evidence, then 47 innocent people were sent to prison while the real criminals walked free. Judge Rodriguez finished grimly. Your office will begin immediate proceedings to overturn every conviction. These people have been in custody based on perjured testimony and planted evidence. Justice demands their immediate release. The courtroom gallery buzzed with the realization that they were witnessing one of the largest judicial reversals in California history. Families of defendants who had been convicted based on Bradley's testimony began calling attorneys, demanding immediate appeals. The scandal was spreading beyond the courtroom walls at light speed. as emergency veterinary technicians arrived. With a specialized stretcher for Rex, Judge Rodriguez knelt beside the dying dog one final time. With infinite gentleness, she stroked his graying muzzle while whispering words of comfort. "You served honorably for years, Rex. What happened today wasn't your fault. You're going to be comfortable now, surrounded by people who understand what a hero you really were." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the emergency veterinarian who responded to the call, quickly assessed Rex's condition with professional efficiency, tempered by obvious compassion. "Judge Rodriguez, this animal is in the final stages of terminal brain cancer. He's been suffering for weeks, possibly months. His neurological function is severely compromised, and he's in significant pain despite the heavy medication. Can you make him comfortable?" Judge Rodriguez asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely. We'll transport him to our facility immediately. He'll receive palliative care in a quiet, peaceful environment. Based on his condition, I would estimate he has perhaps 24 to 48 hours remaining." As Rex was carefully loaded onto the veterinary stretcher, something remarkable happened. For the first time all day, the dying German Shepherd seemed to respond to his surroundings. His glassy eyes found Judge Rodriguez's face, and his tail moved slightly, barely a twitch, but unmistakably a gesture of gratitude from a dog who understood that someone had finally chosen to help him rather than exploit his suffering. Marcus Thompson approached the bench as Rex was being wheeled out of the courtroom. Through tears of relief and vindication, he addressed Judge Rodriguez directly. "Your Honor, I want to pay for Rex's care. He was as much a victim in this as I was. It's the least I can do." Judge Rodriguez smiled through her own tears. "Mr. Thompson, all charges against you are hereby dismissed with prejudice. You're free to return to medical school and pursue your dreams. But your gesture toward Rex shows the kind of character that will make you an exceptional doctor." The media response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the story had exploded across national news networks. "Hero Judge Saves Dying Police Dog While Exposing Massive Corruption" dominated headlines from coast to coast. The footage of Judge Rodriguez kneeling beside Rex while delivering justice became one of the most powerful images in modern judicial history. Carmen Thompson embraced her son as they left the courthouse, both of them weeping with relief and gratitude. Marcus's dream of becoming a pediatric surgeon was not only restored but strengthened by his ordeal. He had witnessed firsthand how the justice system could fail, and he was determined to ensure that his future medical practice would serve those who needed advocates most. As evening fell over Riverside County, Rex rested peacefully in a quiet room at the veterinary hospital, surrounded by soft blankets and caring professionals who understood his true worth. For the first time in months, he was free from the stress and exploitation that had marked his final weeks of service. Meanwhile, in jails across California, wrongfully convicted defendants began receiving calls from their attorneys with news they had never dared to hope for. Their convictions were being overturned, and they would soon be free. Justice had finally been served, not just for Marcus Thompson, but for Rex and dozens of other victims of Officer Bradley's cruel deception. 3 months after that dramatic September day in Riverside County Superior Court, the reverberations of Judge Rodriguez's courageous stand continued to reshape the American justice system in ways that no one could have anticipated. What had begun as a routine drug case had evolved into a landmark moment that would be studied in law schools, police academies, and veterinary colleges for generations to come. Rex passed away peacefully on the evening of September 10, 2019, surrounded by the gentle hands of veterinary professionals who had made his final 48 hours as comfortable as possible. Dr. Elena Vasquez later described his death as the most dignified end-of-life experience I've ever provided for a working animal. Marcus Thompson had indeed paid for all of Rex's final care, visiting the dying German Shepherd twice to sit quietly beside him and whisper words of forgiveness for the suffering they had both endured. The funeral service for Rex drew over 300 attendees, including police officers from across California, who came to honor a dog whose true heroism had been revealed not in his years of service, but in his unwitting role in exposing one of the most significant corruption scandals in law enforcement history. Judge Rodriguez delivered the eulogy, her words forever etched in the memories of those present. Rex served with honor for 5 years, making our communities safer through his genuine abilities. He died as he lived as a hero, though his final act of heroism was one he never chose to perform. Officer Michael Bradley received a sentence of 7 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple felony charges including perjury, evidence tampering, theft of narcotics from evidence storage, and animal cruelty. His conviction sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies nationwide, forcing departments to examine their own canine programs for potential abuse and corruption. The man who had once been featured on magazine covers as an exemplary officer became a cautionary tale taught in police ethics courses across the country. The immediate aftermath of Bradley's confession required unprecedented judicial action. 49 cases involving his testimony were reviewed by a special prosecutor's office, resulting in 43 convictions being overturned and 16 people being released from prison. The financial settlements for wrongful imprisonment exceeded $12 million, bankrupting the Riverside Police Department's insurance fund and forcing significant budget reforms throughout the county. But perhaps the most significant change came in the form of legislation that would forever alter how working animals were protected in the justice system. Rex's Law, officially known as the Canine Welfare and Verification Act, was signed by California Governor Gavin Newsom on January 15, 2020, exactly 4 months after Rex's death. A comprehensive legislation required quarterly veterinary examinations for all police dogs, mandatory retirement protocols for aging or ill animals, and criminal penalties for handlers who used sick or injured dogs in official capacity. Judge Maria Rodriguez became the driving force behind the national adoption of Rex's Law. She testified before congressional committees, spoke at law enforcement conventions, and collaborated with veterinary organizations to establish protocols that would prevent future animal abuse in police work. Her efforts earned her the American Bar Association's Medal of Justice and recognition as Time Magazine's Person of the Year for 2020. The legislation spread rapidly across the United States as the story of Rex's suffering resonated with both animal welfare advocates and law enforcement professionals who recognized the need for reform. Within 2 years, 37 states had adopted versions of Rex's Law, creating a nationwide framework for protecting working animals while maintaining the integrity of police canine programs. Marcus Thompson not only returned to UCLA Medical School, but graduated summa cum laude 3 years later. His experiences in Judge Rodriguez's courtroom having shaped his approach to medicine in profound ways. He specialized in pediatric surgery as planned, but also became a leading advocate for patient rights and medical ethics. His medical school thesis, Justice and Healing, Lessons from the Courtroom, became required reading in several programs. True to his promise made in the courthouse, Marcus established the Rex Foundation for Working Animal Welfare in 2021. The foundation provides free veterinary care for retired police dogs, service animals, and military working dogs, ensuring that animals who have served their communities receive dignified care in their retirement years. The foundation has treated over 2,000 animals in its first 4 years of operation, funded entirely by donations from grateful families of officers and citizens who understood the importance of honoring these four-legged heroes. Carmen Thompson often volunteers at the Rex Foundation, finding peace in caring for animals who remind her of the German Shepherd whose suffering had inadvertently saved her son's future. She frequently tells visitors that Rex was an angel who sacrificed himself to expose the truth, a sentiment that has become the unofficial motto of the Foundation. The Riverside County Courthouse now features a bronze statue of Rex in the main lobby, created by renowned sculptor Maria Santos. The inscription reads, "In memory of Rex, a hero whose final service was the greatest of all, revealing truth and inspiring justice." Visitors often leave flowers at the base of the statue, and Judge Rodriguez makes it a point to pause there each morning before beginning her court sessions. The story of Rex and Judge Rodriguez has been adapted into multiple documentaries, a best-selling book by investigative journalist Sarah Chun, and is currently in development as a major motion picture. However, Judge Rodriguez has consistently donated all proceeds from her involvement to animal welfare organizations, maintaining that Rex's story belongs to everyone who believes in justice. Perhaps the most fitting tribute to Rex's legacy came in 2023, when the first class of K-9 officers graduated from the newly established Rex Memorial Police Dog Academy in Sacramento. The academy, funded partly by settlements from the corruption scandal, trains both dogs and handlers with an emphasis on animal welfare, ethical practices, and the sacred trust between working partners. Today, Judge Rodriguez continues to preside over her courtroom in Riverside County, where she has become known for her unwavering commitment to both human and animal rights. She keeps a photograph of Rex on her bench, not the official police portrait, but a candid shot from his final day, showing him resting peacefully surrounded by the veterinary staff who made his last hours comfortable. The question that stopped time on that September afternoon in 2019 continues to echo through courtrooms across America, reminding everyone who serves justice that truth has many guardians, sometimes in the most unexpected forms. Rex's legacy lives on, ensuring that no working animal will ever again suffer in silence while humans perpetuate lies in their name.